interesting about silence, and I think especially in these moments of rapid cultural change that they were experiencing World War II at that time, and then where we're at this particular moment, noise and distraction alienates us from God, and it alienates us from ourselves. People don't want to confess when they've been wrong or apologize for maybe ways that haven't gotten it 100% right, and also just confess, like, yeah, we don't have full knowledge, and to make space for that change to be okay. Kind of all of our different social problems, whether it's alienation and loneliness to distraction, and kind of this hamster wheel of rushing, and it's all these things that are just kind of giving a sort of malaise.
Have you ever thought about how silence plays to unity and that plays to healing in the Christian community? Those thoughts don't come up very often in a lot of the sermons I listen to. Today we're talking with Aryana Petrosky, who is a poet and an author. She's published in Comment Magazine, The Dispatch. She's getting ready to head to grad school at the University of Edinburgh. Aryana's got some interesting thoughts about how silence is an untapped discipline for the disciple of Christ in the world to combat all the stuff that clutters our lives, that catechizes us in the wrong direction. Silence and unity and healing coming back as we practice the spiritual disciplines. Hello everyone, Dennis Allen with The Disciple Dilemma. Let's take a listen to Aryana's conversation today with me. We met downtown Washington, D.C. in a WeWork office, and it was a great interview talking about her work, thinking about this relatively untapped arena in discipleship, silence and unity, especially in the generation and the times that we live in. Here we go. This is an incredibly counterintuitive conversation in the arena of discipleship because we don't talk about that stuff. We talk about being loud, proud, busting down walls, making it all happen, taking the world by storm. And she's just wandered in the room and started talking about silence. Aryana Petrosky, we are so amped that you'd be with us on The Disciple Dilemma. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
I'm talking to a writer and a poet and someone who is right now leading something called what's about to be the After Party. What in the world is that?
Yeah, so I haven't yet figured out how to get paid full time to write and be a poet. So my day job is actually as a senior manager of partnerships and projects at Redeeming Babel. Redeeming Babel is led by Curtis Chang, who's the host of the Good Faith podcast. And so we create content for Christians to give them resources for how to navigate a lot of complex discussions that are invading our public space. Our current project, which is what I've spent the most time on in the last year or so, is called The After Party Toward Better Christian Politics. And it's Curtis Chang, David French, and Russell Moore coming together to create a small group curriculum for Christians on how to navigate the public square in this really toxic and polarizing political landscape that we find ourselves in. So it's no mistake that we've released it in 2024. If you haven't heard yet, it is a presidential election year. So we've created this course. It's available and free. There's also a book version that will be released in mid-April.
Aryana, when we think about the idea of being followers of Christ, of being bondservants of Christ, of being doulos, I'm just not really sure how we fit you into this puzzle because you're doing a lot of writing, you do poetry, you're obviously doing the After Party, and I'm just trying to think about some of the subjects and some of the thought themes that are going on in your life right now. Would you, as we tee this up, give us a couple of headlines that would say, what have you been writing and thinking about over the last year or two about
being a believer?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good question. I would say that kind of the big overarching question that animates a lot of the writing and thinking I'm doing, which relates to the after party, but is how to equip Christians to live in a pluralistic society in a way that bears the witness of the church and of the belief system. And bears witness to what it looks like to follow Jesus in the public square. So I've taken on a little bit of a unique direction into that conversation. I've spent 6 years now in Washington, D.C. I worked at a think tank. I now work for Redeeming Babel. And being in the waters of D.C. and in these discussions about kind of all of our different social problems, whether it's alienation and loneliness to distraction, and kind of this hamster wheel of rushing, and it's all these things that are just kind of giving a sort of malaise to our culture, but also to the church. I've come across a monastic movement that was around World War II. And I know that this might come to a surprise to some people because it was certainly shocking to me, but it was a Protestant monastic revival.
Okay, pause that for a second, because there's a lot of people who are starting to check out on you.
Right.
Because you said monastery, monastic, and a lot of people are going like, I ain't part of that. But let's walk us back on that one more time, just as a repeat.
Yes.
It was actually a what?
A Protestant monastic revival, and an ecumenical monastic revival more broadly. But a lot of these monasteries that were created in that time were created to address the division, the wounds of violence. And so these are houses of reconciliation, often built with the vision of the unity of the church in mind, and to be a place to convene people from across their divisions to pray together.
Okay. Now, so I'm just kind of being with you guys out there to ask her some questions, right? So I'm thinking about the fact that we're supposed to be kind of the folks that are going and storming the walls and, making a lot of noise to speak into people's lives. Are you telling me that this monastery is about followers of Christ who are running around silent?
Yes, the silence is a huge component to this movement, as it's a monastic practice, a spiritual discipline that I think has been lost in our current cultural moment. And as I write in the Silent Revival, there's a lot of this language around unity and what unity means. Unity to a lot of these monasteries, and the one that I stayed at in particular called the Community of Grand Champ in Switzerland, it begins in your own self. You have to find unity with yourself and with your relationship with God. You have to be unified in that vision that God has for your life. And then that then extends out to unity with the people that you are most directly in relationship with, your family, your friends, your neighbors. That then extends out to the national level, and then even a global vision for what it looks like to see a global church, and a church that's united by brothers and sisters in Christ all around the world. But what's interesting about silence, and I think especially in these moments of rapid cultural change that they were experiencing in World War II at that time, and then where we're at this particular moment, noise and distraction alienates us from God, and it alienates us from ourselves. So silence takes that noise and it dials it down, so that you can actually hear God, and you can actually enter into prayer in a way that you collect yourself, because you're encountering God. You're reminded of who you are, which is someone who bears the image of God.
Folks, we're talking with Aryana Petrosky, author and poet, and she's also leading the charge on the after party, which you heard about at the beginning of this. I want you to stick with us on this because you're hearing some things that are incredibly rare conversation points in the world of followers of Christ. But what I'm going to argue as we go through this is that she's making an incredibly strong biblical case about the way we are supposed to be. Now, having said I'm about to make a really strong biblical case, Aryana, you used some phrases in Comment Magazine, by the way, Killer Magazine. Great that you were in there. So proud of that. And also, I think you're showing up in the Dispatch sometimes as well. So she's not writing a blog out on some dead end post. This has really got some horsepower. Now, as motivating words, you use terms like laborious and desert and softener.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you were talking about the spiritual discipline of silence. You were talking about this idea of there's really no room in the pace and freneticness of the world that we're in. Motivate me some more with this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Let's go over this silence thing again. Is it a necessary component, would you say, for the follower of Christ?
Yeah. Yes, it is essential, but it is also very difficult. Like any spiritual discipline, it's called a discipline because it's not something that comes naturally. It's much easier to skip your prayer in the morning and to just jump into your emails or start scrolling on your phone for social media. We're addicted to the fast pace and we're addicted to the technology. So to set apart time, any amount of time, whether it's 10 minutes or a weekend retreat, it's quite challenging to extract ourselves from this frenetic energy we've addicted ourselves to, because it's an addiction. And so I think that effort at first of all, it's very exhausting, which is why I call it laborious in the article. There's kind of that aspect of holy terror because you are encountering God. It's like, what is God going to say to me? Is he going to tell me to break up with my boyfriend? Is he going to tell me to take a new job or to stay in the job? So on the other side of a retreat or a period of time spent in silence, you can feel the effects for days to come. There's a restorativeness that is very deep and deeper than anything that we can get by just continuing in our fast pace.
You're describing, to a degree, and I think you've written this in your articles as well, that we catechize ourselves with Netflix, Amazon, Google, chatbots, all those sorts of things. That's how we catechize ourselves. That becomes the momentum, the inertia, the stream, and you describe that as no room. I know the comment stream that I'm going to see from some people on this conversation. And here's one of the things that I'm going to bet nickel to a dollar will pop up. Oh, you're trying to get me into the Eastern mystic evacuation of the mind. That's where you're taking me. Would you rebut or comment around that a bit?
It's no mistake that when Jesus was at very critical moments in his own ministry, that he went into the wilderness, which I think another way to put that is he went into silence. And in the silence was ministered by angels. In the silence, he was able to commune with his Father more clearly and directly than having voices and people all around him. So I think for people who kind of feel that hesitancy against some of these more mystical contemplative practices, it's something that's very much embedded in the life of Christ. Bonhoeffer has this really great quote in Life Together, which is his little book where he's talking about how to live in community with other Christians. But he says, only in solitude do we rightly learn how to live in community. And only in community do we learn how to rightly be in solitude. And then I also know it's really unhealthy when I withdraw too much and I'm not participating in community in the way that I ought to be. So I think there's a long practice of silence that I think just speaks to this particular moment in church history, because the competing factors that disrupt our life with Christ are all the louder and all the more addictive. So we kind of have to take extreme countermeasures against that. And I think that extreme countermeasure being like a silent retreat every quarter, or maybe spending your mornings in 30 minutes to an hour of silence every day. Like I think there's these kind of like daily, weekly, yearly practices that fit that, but it's, I think, essential.
Would you, this is terrible, but welcome to America. Would you credit people who are praying as being in silence if they're having their prayer time?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And for a silent retreat, one of the best ways that I've been and kind of taught on how to think about it, because staying at this monastery, I stayed for 3 weeks as a volunteer, and the spiritual director I was assigned to, one of the sisters, had told me to think of that more kind of intentional prayer as kind of an appointment with God. So of course, you're kind of praying throughout all of your activities, and there at the monastery, everything's silent, mealtime, the work that you're doing, everything except for the times of communal worship and prayer, which happened morning, afternoon, evening, and compline. But those silent moments of prayer, treating it as kind of an appointment like that, I think was very helpful, because it frees you up to kind of be praying throughout the day in a more free way, but then to have this more intentional time set apart.
So as I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about the folks who oftentimes watch and comment what we're talking about, there's a rich body, as you quoted Bonhoeffer a minute ago. You talked about St. Bernard. You talked about a number of the folks who've been in the wilderness and who've worked with this. Even recently, one of the, I think, foundational works on the Christian life, Richard Foster, The Spiritual Discipline, spends a fair amount of time talking about silence. If I think about the context of what you're saying, I think about, well, what comes to mind, Psalm 4 or Psalm 46, be still, stop your striving and know that I'm God.
Yeah.
I would say that the difference also between the Eastern mystic who is attempting to evacuate a mind and to seek a dwelling on nothingness is different, the way you're describing this, because you are pointing us to knowing that he is God in our silence, whatever that context means to a person. Is that fair, or am I putting words on the table that aren't really there?
I think as I've continued to practice silence, I think over time, especially because I have incorporated this practice on Sundays where I go to church and I spend the rest of the day in silence.
Say that one more time, because they're not going to believe what you just said.
I go to church and I spend the rest of the day in silence.
Thank you.
It's even more unbelievable living in a city like DC. So I say no to a lot of things. Of course, if there's like a baby shower, I go to the baby shower. I don't, I'm not dogmatic about it. I felt like I was being returned to God and being returned to myself. I think in the like noise and chaos and distraction of our time, there's this pressure, especially for my generation and younger generations, to always be creating yourself. That's what social media is like, to create an image and to create constant, kind of constant relevance.
Yeah.
I'm reading this book by Andrew Root called Congregation in the Secular Age right now. So he talks a lot about this dynamic and how it leads us to be depressed and burned out, and it especially leads the church to feel that way. And so one way that I have experienced kind of fighting back against that temptation is through the silence where I'm not relevant. Nobody knows what I'm doing. I'm not performing my silence for anybody. It's just me and God. And it doesn't get any more simple than that, except for the effects of it through the rest of the week are profound.
Your generation, in case you haven't noticed, there's a little bit of a divide between us generationally, which like my carbon-14 dating is going to be a little different than Ariana's. Your generation, what do you see as center point for meaning and purpose and identity for them? What's the I feel myself being authentic. I feel myself coming alive. What does define that center point for your generation?
For myself, I have come to a point where I would say that I'm an Anglican for the same exact reasons why most of my friends have become ex-evangelicals.
You're not a self-righteous Anglican dropping in to cast shade on evangelicals. You got creds in that neighborhood. You grew up in that world,
Yes.
didn't you?
Yes. I grew up non-denominational on the West Coast, which I like to say is like a whole other layer of non-denom.
Logic-free zone of the West Coast,
Yes,
right?
so much so that when I got to college and I went to a Christian university out west called Azusa Pacific University, people asked what denomination I was, and I said, "Denoma what?" I didn't even know what that word was. I had no concept of church history. I taught myself the Lord's Prayer. Did not know
Wow.
that it was embedded in the liturgy of 4,000 of churches across hundreds of years. So I
Got the CLEP course.
yeah, and so it was college that I really started to experience both liturgy, but also come to an awareness of church history, and that I was a part of a communion of saints that have carried on a tradition for much longer than the last 50 years. And
You were saying something earlier about these friends at Azusa Pacific, a Christian school who went ex-evangelical. They walked off. What's going on here? Why did they walk? And what are you doing over on the Anglican camp, for Pete's sake?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I don't have all the answers to and am muddling my way through still. I can speak from personal experience with my own kind of disenchantment with evangelical Christianity and how that led to finding myself in an Anglican church. As we were discussing, I think it's definitely part of this kind of platform culture, this kind of celebrity performativeness of the church. I also think large scale churches or mega churches aren't helpful in creating spaces and communities of thick rootedness.
It can sure be complicated, can't it?
Yeah.
You go that way.
Yes, it really does. It being known, being recognized, it's a lot easier to just fade into the background if nobody really knows who you are and you're just one of a couple hundred congregants. I think that's a huge component. And then I think there's also, there's my generation talks a lot about church hurt, the abuses of the church, and the ways that it hasn't necessarily protected women or children, or has used rhetoric that does not exemplify the fruits of the Spirit. I think there's a kind of dogmatism that I feel like I kind of am allergic to, that I have found in the Anglican Church, which still has its convictions. It's still very clear about what the church believes, but there's a lot of questions that are left to mystery. And that kind of epistemological humility is what I think we deeply lack in the church, and I deeply crave that I've found in Anglicanism. And so I think there's that kind of that component. I do know I hear a lot and read a lot about people walking away from the faith because it relates to our current political climate and this kind of dogmatism, is they're seeing their relatives, their grandparents or their parents who are acting in ways that are very opposite from the fruit of the Spirit. It's aggressive, it's sometimes even mean, and it definitely is not joy and peace and humility and hope. A lot of it is kind of responding from a place of fear. And so I think with that kind of authenticity piece, it's like there's something here that is very contradictory, and I don't want to be a part of that. And it's coming out of this place of responding to a church that has fallen into platform celebrity culture. It's noisy, it's entertainment filled, it's got fog machines. Actually, I guess fog machines was maybe 5 to 10 years ago. There's a little outdated now, but there are still churches that do that. And I think it looks just like the culture in the way that it platforms pastors in their hip sneakers. And coming back around to your question about what defines my generation, what I was describing about this authenticity and kind of self-creation, that's really exhausting to constantly be creating your image. And to stay relevant with that, I've always kind of been a little bit of a Luddite where I don't really like social media, never have.
You better tell them what the looms mean on the Luddite, because some people aren't exposed to that. When you say Luddite,
It means I'm skeptical of social media and technology.
change is not welcome here. We're going to live with the way we were, except now.
And so I've always been a little bit skeptical of that, like self-creation, and this kind of competition to be seen as hip and cool, and I'm doing fun things, and it's always this kind of constant wheel of showing and demonstrating who I am, who my authentic self is in comparison to other people. I experienced, and I think the church has been remade in that image among evangelical Christianity in the United States. I think there's a lot of churches where that's what the pastors embody. That's what they are putting forth as an image of the cool hip peace pastor with his really attractive wife that he likes to talk about on stage. Like that's a lot of what I think has turned my generation away from the church. I love the liturgy because I can come up and not have to perform, but I can participate. I can come feeling sad and come with the brokenness of the world, but stand up and be a part of a body of believers that is responding to reciting the Lord's the creeds or saying the Lord's Prayer communally or just saying the Psalms together. Like it's this participation in a body of other people that's very important. And then also the reenactment every week of Christ's death and resurrection.
I am male, pale, straight, and very stale. Okay. You're my consultant. We're steering into the abyss today. The great de-churching Jim Davis, Michael Graham wrote 40 million millennials and Gen Zs have walked away. Pew Barna, IPPR, the Humanist Society all document that about 65% of millennials have walked out the door, and close to now 78% Gen Zs raised in church walked out the door. So you're my consultant for the old white guy sitting here with you. Give me some coaching on how I take what you've been describing today and bring that alive in your generation.
I think in a time of extreme division, leaders, especially leaders who have had a lifetime of experience, the church, and anybody who's a confessing Christian has the building blocks already embedded into what it means to be a part of that, which is confession, reconciliation, forgiveness. The church should be the place where people are being convened to walk through those spaces and I think there's a lack of that. I think because of a lack of epistemological humility, people don't want to confess when they've been wrong or apologize for maybe ways that haven't gotten it 100% right. And also just confess, like, yeah, we don't have full knowledge, and to make space for that change to be okay. I think that goes both ends, because you've got cancel culture on the other end that doesn't allow for people to change or to change their viewpoint. And then on the other end, you have people who are unwilling to admit that they've been wrong. And I write actually in a different older article about my relationship with my dad on some of these topics, and we had started to get in a very heated debate where neither of us were listening to each other. And I paused the conversation and I said, let's pray. So we stopped, we prayed, we had a beautiful conversation afterwards. And I think seeing somebody not as, especially because a lot of these issues are political, he's not my political enemy, he's my father. And I, out of respect for him, want to continue to have these challenging conversations. And I want to feel heard. He wants to feel heard. So let's have a conversation where both of us can manage that well. And it's led to, I still don't do it perfectly. I still tease him and goad him at times just to get a rise. I can't help it. But most of the time, that's the that's the posture that we're coming at it, is really truly seeing and trying to understand each other's perspective and story and all the contexts that my dad's bringing into his viewpoint and stances, and trying to approach it from a place of curiosity.
And silence has given you what in that process?
I think silence gives clarity and spaciousness. Like, it's when you can have this spaciousness, it's not threatening for my dad to have the views that he does, because I believe in a God that can hold all of that. And when I enter into the silence and I feel that expanse and I feel that spaciousness, I can then gift that to somebody else and invite them into that space with me.
Wow. Aryana, how do people creep your rap sheet online if they want to find this person and what she's up to?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I'm about actually to go to graduate school this fall at the University of Edinburgh. So I will be harder to get a hold of for a good reason, because I'm going to be reading and writing a lot. But I'm on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter, but I don't like Twitter, so I don't really post on Twitter. So it's not really a great place to stay up to date with me. Otherwise,
a few magazines we might look
at. Comment Magazine. I've got my one piece in the Dispatch, and I think more to come, and especially once I kind of transition away from fast-paced nonprofit work to the scholarly, academic, contemplative life.
Aryana, thank you very much for being with us on The Disciple Dilemma.
Thank you for having me. This was a joy.
It was a delight. Thank you.
Would you help the church think more about discipleship? Would you help us get the conversation started to talk about the biblical discipleship Jesus gave us? Please follow us. Our website, www.thediscipledilemma.com. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and all the RSS feeds. If you'd follow or like us, you'll help us get leverage in the digital marketplace to talk about the fact that discipleship needs to be talked about. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.